more.
We're huge on YouTube.
We are getting pretty big. I feel like we got at least 6 or 7 thumbs up on our last one.
Yes. So let me know when you hit record. Have you done it already?
It's already done.
Okay. Hey everyone, welcome to the Loki Community Call. It is November 4th. So this is the first item on the list. If you haven't registered, there's a Loki 2.4 theme talk in ObservabilityCon on the 10th next week at 1810 UTC. And I'm doing some shameless self-promotion here. It'll be Ivana, myself, and Trevor. We'll be talking about a lot of changes that come with the Loki 2.4 release, and then a lot of associated changes on the Grafana side as well, which make it easier to use, easier to interact with, more intuitive, that sort of thing. So we'd love to see you there. Feel free to follow the link, register, that sort of thing.
Yeah, there'll be a Q&A at the end, so you can ask any pressing questions.
Yeah. You get to ask all the hard questions that I don't have answers to.
Or you can join me in trolling Owen and Ivana and Trevor with terrible questions.
Yeah, I really enjoy that. Thank you. And yeah, let's see. So 2.4, we're basically in the process of right now of determining exactly which commit this will be, but by and large, everything is merged. And there's going to be a whole host of new features as well as regular improvements. But we can go down the list here. Out of order is probably my favorite one. This is one of the out of order. This is probably one of the oldest and most highly upvoted issues of all time in the Loki repo. Basically, it is not super uncommon for people with all sorts of use cases, but particularly if they're using agents that aren't aware of Loki's ordering constraint, or they're using pre-processing layers. Basically, there can be a bunch of different reasons why it can be hard to get the order just right, and Loki has this requirement that incoming logs must be ingested in timestamp ascending order. So over the past like year and a half, we started sitting down and figuring out, well, does this need to be this way? And ultimately realized that no, it did not. This was historically a constraint we pulled in from Prometheus, Cortex, which are Cortex mainly is our one of our upstream dependencies for Loki. And now this should largely just disappear for 99% of use cases. We can still run into some of these issues, but it's really only for logs that are very old, because most of these problems will result in logs being off by a second or so. And now we introduce basically a tolerance window. It defaults to 30 minutes, but I think a lot of our configs run with it at about 1 hour, and you can kind of set it how you'd like, and you can have basically out of order logs within this validity window period. And this should make Loki just much easier to use for people that are running other agents that besides Promtail, for people who use pre-processing layers, for people who are trying to ingest things like AWS Lambda logs, think really high cardinality data sources, that sort of stuff. So very happy to have that in. I just want to go down the list. Ed, you want to?
Yeah, I'll talk about this. I don't want to. I'm going to tease a little bit because I want people to come to the talk next week to get more info. But we've been working really hard in the last few months to sort of make the non-Kubernetes use cases for Loki. I mean, this is probably true across the board, but really, if you're running Loki as a single binary, we've been doing a lot of work to make that work a lot better. So the current limitation of the single binary is it doesn't run things like the query front end, so it doesn't do query parallelization. It doesn't horizontally scale super well, and you just don't have a ton of flexibility. It's either you run that and If you want high availability or more scalability, then you have to jump to a microservices deployment. And if you're not in Kubernetes, good luck. It'd be very difficult. So that's not going to be the case anymore. We've taken a lot of the features of the microservices deployment and found ways to stuff them into the single binary so that, out of the gate, it'll do queries, query splitting and sharding and things. So it's, on a single instance, it's limited to the number of cores that the machine has available for parallelization. But it does allow you to sort of add more single binary instances to be able to horizontally scale and get high availability. And then we're introducing 2 new targets called read and write, which are intended to allow you to separately scale the read and write path in a simple way also. So you don't have to set up a query front end and query scheduler and index gateways and all these other microservice pieces. So I guess I said I was going to tease it, and I feel like that was the the whole thing. But the also coming hand in hand with this is we're trying to do a lot to simplify the config. I just warn you all on the call here. We're doing our best here to make sure that we don't break things. And when I say break, I mean mostly like Loki doesn't start because of a config error. But we are down to the wire and doing our best. It's a bit tricky to sort of honor existing configs, but also do things like apply some sane defaults. We've changed a number of defaults based on how we run Loki. So we'll get as much of this info as we can into the upgrade guide. But I think especially if anybody that's here that's keen on trying to help us, we're going to have an image. How would we communicate that? I don't know. Think about that while we're on the call, but we're gonna have an image we're using soon internally to test stuff that anybody that has the opportunity to try running it and make sure it works for them, and any sort of configs they have. So very excited. A lot easier to run Loki in the small and medium and even some small large use cases, medium large use cases outside of Kubernetes, or even in sort of Kubernetes. But if you didn't want to use the Helm chart or the JSON, it's a lot easier to run there.
Yeah, we're super excited by both these things. A lot of
words.
And thematically, right, it's all about making Loki easier to use. That's one of the things that we've really, really learned, past year and a half or so, is we generally build Loki to run as a single binary because it's easy, because we can develop locally with it because it makes sense, and you can get started with it. But the gap between that and then running Loki as a horizontally scalable HA service is pretty large. And so this is kind of our approach at building a middle ground for that. And then out of order should just make everyone's use cases way easier. And this is one of the things that we're really intentional about targeting moving forward, is making Loki more intuitive, simpler, easier, that sort of thing. And then I can jump into custom retention. But if anyone has any questions, feel free to say something in chat or just interrupt me, and we can do this. And I'll help answer stuff now, or we can do it at the end. And then I'll just go into custom retention. This is the ability now to define retention rules for tenants and even for streams within tenants. So Loki is multi-tenanted by default, which begs the question, why historically hasn't there been different retention rules for different tenants? Because you can really feasibly say, oh, I want my compliance team's logs available for 2 years, but my dev team only really needs logs for a month or 2. And that's reasonable. And so this basically is something that we can do now. And you can break it down further to say things like, I want my development applications to be around for a week, my production application logs to be around for a month, and then my audit logs for a year, right? To be able to slice and dice these across tenants and streams as we see fit. And then deletion kind of comes hand in hand there. It'd be really, really hard to release one without the other, especially for things like GDPR concerns, where we have these right to be forgotten. So deletion is the new API in Loki where you can basically request that certain logs be deleted. And that's picked up, and then there's a cancellation period. So if you accidentally, if you have an oops moment, you have a little bit of time to cancel that. But ultimately, that'll help people stay in compliance. It'll help delete logs when we accidentally send a bunch of stuff that we didn't actually mean to ingest. So it helps in cost reduction efforts as well. And all in all, works is very complementary with custom retention. And I guess that's less of an ease of use thing here, but it really targets Loki for more multi-tenanted, larger environments, and people that are scaling running Loki from their team to their organization, and really hitting that story. You want to talk about Kafka next?
I don't think Cyril's here, is he? I don't think he can make this time. Yeah, this was something that we added as sort of. I mean, the story here follows a similar one that Owen just talked about. The existing tools that pull stuff out of Kafka that send to Loki. We're having some troubles with the ordering constraints, so we actually added a Promptail Kafka consumer, and only just recently got around to adding that to the open source. So that got merged in, I don't know, this morning. So that should be part of 2.4. So if you want to consume logs from Kafka using Promptail, this would be a thing you can do now or soon.
Yeah, we were able to sneak that in yesterday.
Yeah. We merged like 50 PRs in the last 2 days. I did add an issue here. Nobody's feel obligated to, but I wanted a place to post the image when you get that K70 image cut. If anybody's looking to kill some time the rest of the day and they want to try the image in various configs or against their configs and help us look for any bugs, it's much appreciated.
Yeah, I think that's probably the meat of what'll be in 2.4.
Yeah,
as always.
I see Ivana's here. I'll ask if she had anything she wanted to call out from the Grafana side, or if people should just wait and show up to the talk next week.
Yeah, pretty much it. Yeah, definitely worth to come on. Is it on Wednesday? Yeah, and see what's new.
Yes, definitely.
All right, and I know we have Eduardo joining us today.
Hi guys.
Hey,
Eduardo, how you doing?
Good to see you.
If you're not familiar with Eduardo, he is the man behind FluentBit and probably all of FluentD as well. I don't know the history back that far, but Eduardo has been super helpful in the past trying to make the Loki experience better, working around our ordering constraint, which doesn't exist anymore. So hopefully that makes your life a bit easier on the FluentBit side of things.
Yeah, this out of order issue, was a huge pain for many users, right? So hopefully there's a solution that is in your side, not our side. So happy to continue contributing. So how we can make our project a first-class citizen with Loki, right? I think that the use cases that you're seeing are pretty much the same one that we see, right? So people ingesting Kafka, they need pull this data to Kafka, send it to Loki, send it elsewhere. So if you can normalize that on the Fluent ecosystem, I think that would be great.
So would you say that ordering has historically been the biggest problem from Fluent to Loki?
Yeah, the thing is that in our world, people just care about throughput, send the data as fast as possible. But when you make a connection, that connection fails because of a network issue, and you get another connection. This is going to retry it, so this hits first, and out of order, right? Yeah. So many people got these problems, but they were solving it with Promptail. But they got back, hey, we need also more performance, or we need some kind of filtering capabilities before sending out the data. So
Is there anything else that you see that we should solve there that would help on our end to make it easier?
I think that if no matter how do we send the data, you don't get these kind of errors. I think that that's pretty much it, right? So we are seeing many people moving away from Elastic to Loki, right? Just talking with the community users, so we see that adoption of Loki is growing a lot in our world. So I think that this was one of the biggest problems for some users at high scale, right? When you hide just one box, it's not that important, but I think that we still have to do some work in our side with labels. I think that the integration that we have in FluentBit is quite more basic than the one that you offer when you created the Go extension for FluentBit. So yeah, so maybe we should collaborate more on terms of how to get the solution right for all the current and new users that are coming. Yeah, and service discovery. Yeah, that is something that is not there.
Okay. Very cool. Yeah, and maybe we can have a little collaboration, set up a Grafana cloud account that we can use to kind of end to end some of this stuff between our development branches. That sounds great to me. I mean, as I think I told you in person a while ago, I'm not super opinionated how people get logs into Loki, as long as they're getting into Loki.
Yeah, actually, we just try to be, in general, right? Our speech try to be vendor agnostic, but to be vendor agnostic, also you have to provide a really good experience for the end user, right? And if we are missing these features from the agent side, yeah, that is something that needs to be fixed.
Awesome, thank you.
Wonder what a good way might be to get feedback from the community. Maybe an issue in either the Loki or the FluentBit repo to sort of solicit feature requests. I'm not sure if you have another process for, soliciting input on like what people might want to see to make FluentBit work better for them with Loki.
Yeah, GitHub works, but one of the problems that we are struggling right now is that we have many inquiries, so it's hard to deduct which is coming from which company or person or community, right? So it's hard to prioritize. So I think that you are going to get first this kind of requirements, and if an issue is open, just ping us internally. Hey, this is coming through us, and maybe we can try to prioritize it.
Awesome.
Ed, do you remember about? I know we have a FluentBit plugin. I want to say Cyril wrote a long time ago.
Yes.
And then Eduardo, that was before I think FluentBit natively supported Loki, and now so there's kind of two modes to run in. Do you think that we can just deprecate our current one right now, the plugin that the Loki team wrote, or is there still feature parity that we would need?
Is that a question for me or for Ed?
That was more for Ed, but if you know, Edward, I don't know. So anyone really?
Yeah, I don't. I mean, largely we've just not done much with it. It's just been sitting there. I know a few people use it. I think Eduardo, you mentioned there's a couple things that we pulled in from the Go libraries around. Maybe that's not even true about processing labels, but I don't think we really have all of the pipeline stages that Promptail has. So we probably would make sense for us to, at least in the documentation, mark it as deprecated and indicate, I think what we really would prefer is to just have the native integration be the only one, because we don't want to have to maintain two or have people confused. So that might be an interesting way for us to get feedback about anything that any reason they might be using the plugin that might be a feature that we'd want to look at for FluentBit. So we could definitely do that. Just increase the documentation.
Yeah, also we can come out, or maybe if the Grafana team can do this, it's like somebody who has a lot of expertise with the plugin that you wrote, the Grafana, and using FluentBit. It's like try to make a doc. Hey, this is our missing features that we need. You need some parity on these features, and so we can set a roadmap on that. Otherwise, people who's using this connection will say, hey, this is deprecated, but I don't have this feature in the native connector, right? And in Fluentbit, we are not experts on Loki, right? Everybody thinks that we're experts on Stackdriver, Loki, S3. Actually, we pretty much try to do our best to connect, understand protocols, and ship the data. But the users are the ones who has more voice on this, right? So if you have somebody in your community had good experience with this and can share more, that would be great.
Awesome. I look forward to making that even more awesome. I know there's still a lot of folks that use FluentBit that, you know, we really just generally don't want to have to ask people to, you know, tear out existing infrastructure. Or also, I know that one of the things that people really like about FluentBit or FluentD is the ability to send logs to 2 places like S3 and to a service like Loki. So having the ability to just compress logs in a long-term storage is desirable for a lot of folks. So I'm very excited to continue to make that better. Appreciate the work you've done so far, Eduardo. It's awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
That's about I don't know. We didn't have a whole lot on our agenda today. We've been pretty heads down trying to get this 2.4 release stuff squared away. Roger, I see you joined. We merged your PR yesterday. I think we finally fixed.
Yeah, thank you.
Speaking of Promtail, Roger found this bug a bit ago, and after so like fast forward to today, and myself and Robert Frado are now experts on this problem because we chased it down and then discovered that this was the same bug you'd reported as well as somebody else. And we've never run into it because our infrastructure, we add labels like pod template hash or controller hash, things like that. But there's a bug in Promtail where if the only label that changes, and this is mostly going to apply to Kubernetes, the only label that changed on a file was the file name itself. We would not follow the file to the new file name because we didn't include the file name label in the sort of hash of the target that we were following. So sorry, Roger, that it took us so long to help get to your PR to sort this out, but it's unfortunate. One of those cases that, you know, once it became pretty obvious to us and got in the middle of it, was like, oh yeah. But I believe that your fix looks good. We merged it yesterday, so I think everybody's, you know, Promtail experience. I think the reason that most people probably didn't run into this or don't run into this is because we made a sort of a different. This, in hindsight, I would say it was a bit of a mistake, but the default scrape configs for Promtail will include all pod labels. So, you know, in hindsight, I wish we hadn't done that. And I would say if you're doing that, to probably stop, because you probably don't care about most of the pod labels that are being auto added. And even though they typically don't increase the cardinality, like usually your pod labels are 1-to-1 with the pod, so it's not probably causing you any cardinality issues. It just sort of wastes space in your index, you know, with labels that you don't use for querying. You know, I can't remember ever, you know, querying for a pod template hash or querying for what else do we get thrown on there? Some whatever labels your pods have. So, you know, if it's part of your query pattern, like if you had labels and you use them in your querying, then, you know, absolutely, that's what they're there for. But having them sort of auto included was probably in retrospect, I wish we hadn't done it that way. But so I think that more people now that are using the agent, we removed that from the agent scrape config. So I think that's why we started seeing it pop up. But appreciate the help, Roger. I think we're squared away on on that fix now. And that was it. That was the last bug in Loki. So I'm not sure what we're going to do now, but I had to keep my mouth shut here before I get this release done.
Yeah. Yeah, now we can kind of open it up if anyone has questions, that sort of thing. I see we have one in the chat from Edinardo. I have a similar I have a similar issue here. Let me see if I can open this. You can take a look. It says I have a similar issue to the one described here. I've already tried all of the parameters on the querier for query range without success. When the query time span of logs is relatively large, such as 30 days, and the number of logs is relatively large, it cannot be queried. Okay, this I think so. Cyril had the same thought that I did. Is this running in a single binary deployment?
I don't think this. Oh, actually, somebody dropped, and it might have been who asked the question. Unless they came
Take care,
back.
Eduardo.
I lost the.
Well, so I guess for everyone else, then we definitely see this when running in like a single binary deployment, or just not having provisioned enough queryers, for instance. When your read path isn't large enough to query as much data as you need to effectively, you generally need to add more compute. And so that's the big one. Notably, the single binary, it's easier for the single binary to ingest data because data ingestion tends to be relatively not constant, but predictable and doesn't have too much variance. And we can ingest a lot of data on the same amount of CPU resources, for instance, relative to how much data we can query with those same resources. So querying, especially over long periods of time or huge amounts of data, can be difficult. And so generally, if you want more like better query latencies and that sort of thing, beefing up or scaling out your read path is going to be the answer there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a 5-minute timeout, so it ran for 5 minutes. Rather, I'm almost sure that it just timed out. And that metrics.go line is one of our favorites in Loki, and so you can see the throughput on those queries is about 268 megabytes a second. That's not uncommon for a single query, depending on the query. Could be a bit faster than that, honestly, for logs queries like this, where a single instance can do 300, 400, 500 megabytes a second. So when we start seeing queries in our clusters that are 40 gigs a second, it's because we have 40 or 50 queryers, each with 6 cores in them, or 6 provision cores. And so the parallelism is the key to success here. And until now, you would have had to set up a query front end. So that's why we're excited about the scalable deployment stuff, is that even the single binary process will have a query front end now. So adding more of them in parallel does allow it to parallelize the query requests across, because they use the ring to communicate and gRPC to communicate. So that is going to enable folks to get much higher throughput even in that single binary case. So that's going to be pretty exciting.
Yeah, exactly. We really want to bridge the gap between, I've tested out Loki on a single binary, and now I want to run it for my team or my part of my organization. And suddenly I care about things like high availability and like durability guarantees, so things like replication factors and whatnot. And so the idea that we can say, hey, I want to provision 5 nodes that are responsible for ingesting all the data in Loki, and then maybe another 10 nodes to be available for reads. And you can kind of scale that depending on your tolerance for cost versus query latency. Right? If you care a lot more about how fast your queries are, you can add more resources to your read path. And if you care a lot more about just really hammering down the cost, then you can shrink that and you can tolerate a little bit slower queries. And making that jump is definitely one of the things we're super excited about with 2.4. And I think that's all I had. So unless there's someone else who would like to ask some questions or really anything.
Tell us about your Loki experiences.
Yeah.
Good or bad. We have thick skins.
I got a question for you about the and you had an issue talking about improving I think improving like the ability to get logs out of AWS CloudWatch.
Oh yeah.
Because the solution at the moment is like run a crap ton of lambdas to do it.
So this is here.
Yeah, so I was just curious if there was
AWS Lamb.
any kind of headway on that.
Yeah, so here, I remember this one. So I wrote a blog post about this. Actually, was early on in the kind of out of order discussions, right? So what am I going to say? Old problem, cardinality versus ordering, and so basically you had to spin up some lambdas, and they would read CloudWatch logs, and they basically would be evented for when new logs came in. It would hit this lambda, and then you could basically write that into Promtail, which could then write it into Loki. And you had to do that for basically to make sure that you were either not blowing up your cardinality or dropping logs due to out of ordering, or needing to basically re-timestamp them to guarantee ordering. So it's a really clunky process, hard to run, generally unfavorable for a bunch of reasons. So recently, tools, we've retooled this a little bit. So there's still this Lambda Promtail, but instead of, and we have some kind of docs on the way as well for this. And the idea now is that you can spin up a Lambda in the same way, but you can also just use our Lambdas. We now have it's called Elastic Container Registry, ECR, in AWS, which will host this version, which we build, which we vend as kind of part of the Loki process in CI. And then that will be updated. We'll be able to expose release versions with this in the same way. And then there are like Terraform scripts, for instance. It's somewhere in docs, maybe Loki docs, and this will be on the website as well. I'm just poking around here. I
think it's under clients, honestly.
But the idea is, here we go. Is we can basically now spin up one Lambda. You can provision it with Terraform. You can point it to the Docker image that Loki hosts, and we'll handle this for you, and you won't need to run Promtail, for instance, at all. So the idea is that this should make it just simpler to get logs into Loki. And Terraform. And there's a little guide somewhere in here. But that is generally the idea. Is that this should just now have a couple less edge cases, a couple more edge cases removed, so it should be easier to use in general. You shouldn't need to provision as many things, and you shouldn't need to worry about packaging Lambdas yourself. Now that Lambda supports Docker images, and we're vending Docker images for this tool, you can just point it to the ECR repo. And I can update when I find all the docs for that.
Okay, well, this is fantastic. I don't know how I missed the announcement of that.
I'm not sure if we've announced that one yet.
No, we haven't.
Okay.
Oh, all right. Well, I will be looking into that immediately.
Yeah. Callum, do you mind finding the docs on the Loki site for me and putting them there in that link?
Yes. I don't know how often we publish them, like if we only do it for releases. So yeah, I'll take a look.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, so we'd also, Zach, love to hear how that works for you. We've tried to make that, be a lot less rough around the edges, right?
Yeah, I mean, being able to just run one thing rather than, I think the old solution, the other problem was it was one Lambda per CloudWatch log group. So you needed like an entire fleet of them.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I think when I spun up the proof of concept, I just like coded one log stream or log group in there. I don't remember all the nomenclature.
Yeah, I remember I was like, oh, this is fine. I'll just tell it to record all the CloudWatch logs. And it immediately was telling me, no, you can't do that.
Yeah. So obviously there's still a question of like how this would scale. It's more or less the same code, but it uses subscription filters instead of like the rate limited API. Obviously, you need to scale it somehow, right? But the nice thing with the Terraform is you can just pass in a list of all of the Logwatch or CloudWatch log groups instead of having to like copy paste the deployment multiple times, and then just set a number of replicas you want to run, right? So it should be easier. Unfortunately, Owen, because we haven't released 2.4, and I don't know how the next version on the website gets updated. The new docs aren't on the website yet. They're only in the GitHub repo.
No worries. So the doc will be included in the 2.4 release for it, and yeah, as usual, will be available on Slack. So just scream a little bit, Zach, and we'll find you. Any other takers for questions, concerns, that sort of thing? All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming to this week's or this month's, when are we, every 3 weeks, something like that, edition of the Loki community call, and would love to see some of y'all at the ObservabilityCon talk next week. We'll be there as well, at least a few of us, to do Q&A. And yeah, in the meantime, happy Loking. Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.